All right, so let's run through this Google Sheets Wordle. So first of all, of course, came the idea of, well, how do we make Wordle in Google Sheets? So um, my sort of standpoint on that is start with the user interface. So I set up something that looked kind of, well, almost exactly like this, except without all the colors and the guests filled in. So once I had that sort of laid out, it gives you that bit of inspiration for how you move to the next part of the process. So I wanted to make sure that I had a spot where I could put in a word. So I put that on a separate tab to keep that hidden if we're playing this with someone else and we want to hide that from them. And then I also needed some sheets to actually go in and run everything behind the scenes. And we'll go through how those actually worked in a second. So the way that this works here is actually through using Google Sheets conditional formatting. So let's clear all our guesses and run through this. And it's going to take a second because there are a few hundred formulas that have to update for this to actually run. Okay, so let's let our first guess be guess. And then so we put one letter per cell using the tab key to switch between them. And then to enter them, you can hit space in the enter box. And then it'll see, okay, there's one S and there's an E in the middle position. So maybe we'll try something else. Like shell. Let's do shell. And oh, it's not shell. Okay. And maybe it's sheet. Oh, look at that. It's almost like I knew the answer already. And then once you're done, it pops a little scorecard for you in the bottom corner. So you can, share that wherever you want to. So that's basically the essence of how this works at the front end. You can see that, of course, our keyword over here is updating, though unfortunately it doesn't let us type using the keyboard. We have to use our own keyboard and not the on-screen one. I suppose you could do that using Google Scripts, but that might be a whole other big project. Um, so yeah, so how do we actually get these to change color? How do we get them to work? So the answer is conditional formatting. So let's take a look at how that works. So to set up conditional formatting, you can go to Format, Conditional Formatting, and you can see I've got 4 rules here that correspond to this box. And for this box over here, similarly, 4 rules. Um, so how do these work? Well, first of all, let's look at this one here. So for all of these, they use a custom formula. And the reason this is a custom formula is because I wanted to do all my computation on different tabs, and Google Sheets formulas unfortunately don't support references to other sheets unless you have the indirect command running, which is what I'm using here. And indirect basically just takes a string or text input and then translates that into a cell reference. So in this case, I'm looking at B underscore guess 1, which is the tab down here, and looking at cell B10, which is this cell here, which is just flagging errors. So that's how that conditional formatting sort of works at a high level. And the rest of these are very similar, except you'll notice that the formula here is a little bit longer. And that's for a few reasons. So inside the indirect formula here, you'll notice that it has the same B underscore guess 2, but then we're using the end symbol, and that's how you join 2 strings together, or text. String just means text together. And the text we're joining is actually, we want to build a cell reference. So by cell reference, I mean a reference to a specific cell in B underscore guess 2. So this is the green rule. So this is to flag a section of the main Wordle grid if it matches up, if it's the right color in the right letter in the right spot, it wants it to be green. So we want to check that cell, and if a specific cell, and if that cell is good, then I used just the emojis to actually represent what will be in that cell, then it flags it as green. And there's a very similar, almost identical rule for yellow as well, and gray as well. So how does this work? Um, so there's a couple things going on. So first of all, that cell reference. So the reason I'm using a VLOOKUP here is because as we move down the sheet or sideways across the sheet, we want to be able to, if it's cell B2, this cell here, well, I want that cell to be a little bit, obviously referencing a different column from if I'm looking at cell A2, or if I'm looking at cell C3 and D3, they need to be different references. So the way that we achieve that is by sticking together sort of reference to the sheet with a reference to a cell and a specific cell. So the way we get that specific cell is by using the column of the current cell. So in conditional formatting, if you put in an unrestricted cell reference, so just A2, then it's actually going to replace that with all of the different cells in the range. So as the conditional formatting checks, cell B2, it would replace this A2 with B2. Or if we're down here in cell E4, it would replace this A2 with E4. So I want to find what column that is, and then replace that using VLOOKUP with a reference to whatever would be in that cell. So if it's if the column it returns is 1, then it should be a B. If it's 2, it should replace it with a C, and so on. So that's how we get the first part of the reference. And then the second part of the reference is just a number. So we can actually just straight up put a number in. And the way we do that is just by adding 79. And we'll talk about the anatomy of that cell. And then we just check if whatever is in that cell is equal to the green square, and then we're done. Okay. So that's a very high level overview of how that works using the conditional formatting rules. And if you're not 100% on that, I would encourage you to sit down and actually parse through that formula yourself and take a look at that in a copy of the sheet. So yeah, let's break down how this works. So first of all, we have our word one letter at a time. So we have just the letters of sheet, which is our current key, and those are each in their own column on this sheet. Then we have our letters. So this is how our keyboard actually works. So this keyboard over here, how it keeps up to date with what's in it. So the way I've done that is I've put a list of all the keys and I put them in keyboard order, which doesn't have to be that way. I just found it convenient for typing them all in. And what it does is it's actually going to go and look at each of the guesses. So you'll notice it says BLK guess 1, BLK guess 2, all the way up to 6. And that just means, is this letter black in guess 1? So in guess 1, for example, we have a G, and G is not in the word. So right from guess 1, we know that this letter should be grayed out and not applicable. So if we go down to G, yeah, we can see that in guess 1, it's actually grayed out. And the formula here, the way it kind of works is it's going to check to see if that word is in the word. And if it is in the word in guess 1, then it's also going to just confirm that that line has been actually entered in, that the enter checkbox has been checked. And then it's also going to check to make sure that it's not actually in the word. So in the correct word. Um, so in this case, G is not in the correct word. It is in that guess. So with all those pieces sort of together, it tells us, okay, well, then I'm good to go. It's not in the correct word and it's not in and it is not, or sorry, it's not in the correct word. It's not in the correct in the, it's not in the current guess, and it's not in the correct word. There we go. And then it does that similarly for all the letters for that guess, and then it continues for the other guesses. And for something like, say, guess 6, because we don't actually have a guess 6 entered, it's automatically going to evaluate all of those to false. Yellow is very similar. So it's going to check to see if the letter is in the word that's currently been guessed. So, whatever guess 1 is, it's going to check to see if that word is in the word. And then it's going to assess to make sure that that guess has been guessed. And it's going to check to see if that letter is in the word. And if it is, it's going to flag it as yellow. So for example, for this letter here, E, well, that is in guess 1, and it's in our word, it's in sheet. So it's going to flag that for yellow. And then for greens, similar process, except instead of checking guess by guess, what it's going to do is check column by column. So it's going to take a look at all of the entered guesses in column B and see, oh, well, is there an H in any of these guesses? And if there is, there we go. This H on our keyboard will now be green. Or is there an E in position 3, in column 3? Then yes, E will now be green. So it does that for all of the columns, and it kind of limits what range it checks by using the number of checkboxes available. And then what it'll do is it'll check, okay, well, are any of my letters green? Yes. Okay, we have a true here, and that's the E. And then yellow does a similar sort of check, except it also uses a reference to the green. So if something's green, it can't be yellow anymore. So on our keyboard, we can't have a key that's both green and yellow, so it'll change that yellow to a false value. And then very similarly for black, and then it gives us our output. So the NAs are for letters that haven't been guessed at all, and then we have green, yellow, and black. So that's how our keyboard works. Next up is how our main board works. So how do we figure out what color to paint things in our main keyboard? So I did this across 2 sheets, which is a little bit inefficient, but it was just getting a little bit visually messy. And I'm a big fan of, if things are getting messy, you know what, start a new page. I do that all the time when I'm doing math or working on a drawing or whatever. If it's too dense and you can't keep track of everything, just start a new page. So this page here is fairly simple. What it does is just looks at every guess, checks to see if it's entered and if it's actually a word. And the way it checks that if it's a word is, first of all, by taking all the letters and concatenating them together to make all those letters into a word. And then it's actually going to check in a sheet called dictionary to see if that word shows up in the dictionary. So for example, guess does show up in the dictionary. Shell does show up in the dictionary. And it also makes sure that it's not a blank as well. And this also has a side benefit of getting rid of any shorter than 5-letter words and not letting those be entered because they won't show up in the dictionary. So there's our kind of is word and entered and okay. So entered and okay is kind of our master list. And what we do is we just take a look at that. We count them up. Well, we have 3 trues in here. So we've made 3 guesses, correct guesses. And then it's going to say, okay, well, that means we're on row 4 in the Wordle sheet. That number here is 4. We're on guess 4. That's what's been entered so far. And then we have some error flagging. So there's only one kind of error that this handles right now, which is if you kind of skip a guess in order. So say instead of putting sheet here, I decided I want to go down here and do it like this, and then it's going to say, oh, I don't like that. Or if we skip one without entering it, it's going to say, oh, I don't like that, and it's going to flag everything as red. You can see that it does not like that. So let's uncheck those boxes and make everything okay. So basically, this just checks to see if we've guessed out of order. If there's stuff wrong with our guesses, it's going to just turn the grid red. And that's just to prevent some exploits I discovered where you could guess partial words or skip ahead a guess and kind of get some letters without actually guessing those letters. And then the other thing we check is to see if the puzzle's been filled in. So if we've used all 6 guesses up, it ends the game automatically. And then checking for victory. So if there's no error and we haven't filled up the puzzle, then and of course, if the sheet we'll get to in a second also says that we have a victory, we're good to go. So this is guess 2 sheet, and this is actually kind of interesting to talk about. So this is where we do most of the calculation for finding whether or not a letter is yellow, green, or black on the main grid. And setting this one up was a little bit tricky because I ran into some problems where, say, a duplicate letter wouldn't be flagged as green or as yellow or black as the right color, basically, if it was a duplicate. So I was having a hard time with that. So what I did is I actually took a piece of paper and I just said, okay, well, if I was the computer, how would I check a guess against a correct word? So in this case, our correct word or key is sheet, and our guess is uh, named, inspiringly enough, guess. So how did we pull that off? So basically, the algorithm I came up with on paper and actually have put here as well basically works this way. So I'm going to, first of all, look at them side by side, and then I'm going to check for green squares because that's pretty easy to check for. So basically, if whatever I have here is the same as whatever I have here, it's green. So for most of these letters, that's not true. But for E, I actually check this versus this. Oh, they're the same. So I replace this with a green square. And in my key, I'm actually going to modify my key and replace that with, I used a $sign just as a filler symbol. And the reason that this is important is because as I'm checking for, say, duplicate letters, well, I don't want an E in the key if I'm checking for yellow letters, when in fact that E has been already used up by a correct guess over here by a green. So I don't want something that should be black because there's no duplicate of that letter being flagged as yellow. So then what I do next is actually go in and check each of the letters in the word, the remaining letters in the word. So the first letter is G, and I'm going to check that letter against what's in the key. Okay, well, there's no G in the key, so I'm going to move on to the next letter, which is a U. Similarly, no U. Next letter is a green square. Obviously, there's no green square, so that is just going to get flagged as black, and we'll clean that up later. And then finally, the kind of exciting bit is here when I have this S. So there is an S in my word. It's the first character. So how do I deal with that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check S against my previous key, and I'm going to notice that I do have an S in the word. And that's kind of what shows up here. Okay, I have an S. Good. So we replace that S with a yellow square, and we kind of flag that S as being a yellow character. And then down here for the S, the second S, it doesn't end up flagged as yellow because it checks the word in the previous key here, SH $ET, and notices there is no S in that key because we removed it in the previous step. And that's how we don't end up with both S's being flagged as yellow. And then what I do is I just kind of take a look at the cells up here. So I check, okay, is this green? No. Okay, is this yellow? No. Okay, then it must be black. Similarly, it checks over here. So, is this green? No. Is this yellow? No. Okay, it must be black. Then, okay, is this green? Yes, it is green, so this must be green. Checks this one here. Okay, is this yellow? Is this green? No. Is this yellow? Yes, it is yellow. Yes, so we'll place it with yellow, and then the same thing for the last character. And then we go through the same process again, right? So here we guessed shell, and right away we have 3 guesses that are the right color. It matches up well. So our key just becomes those last few letters, ELL, or sorry, EET, because it's our key, which is the correct guess, and our last 2 letters are L and L. And then what it's going to do is do that same process, look for yellows. There's no yellows. Third time we try it, it actually goes in, and what it's going to do is notice that the guess is the exact same, and we're good to go. Oh, wait a second, that's why. It's like, why is that not doing that? Because we actually have to guess something in there. There we go. It's like, why is that blank? That shouldn't be blank. So there we go. And then for our third guess, what we do is we have sheet is our guess, and that actually matches our key, and it's going to check each letter. Notice that each letter is green, and that gives us greens across the board down here. And then these all remain blank. So then how does it actually take all these and turn this into a grid? So these cells here actually correspond to our grid. So our conditional formatting on the main sheet is actually looking at this row of 6 by 5 cells and looking at what color the emojis are within those cells. And the way we get those emojis is just a specific reference to the column. So just to kind of show you what that is, basically what it is going to do, it's going to say, okay, well, on my guess 1, has the guess been entered and is the guess okay? If it is okay, then what it's going to do is transpose B47 to B78, and that's this area here that's highlighted in purple right now. It's going to take those cells and basically rotate them 90 degrees and display them out sideways. And otherwise it's going to be blank. So that's how we get our columns here. This is just what we had in guess the same area, but for guess 1. And then we turned that sideways to get this string here. And then there's also a victory check. So this is the overall victory, and then we check each row. If it's 5 greens in a row, that's a victory, and then this changes to true as well. And that shows up on our guess 1 sheet. And we then take all of these that we've sort of stuck together, we've taken all of the rows, stuck it together, and then we stick those together using a new line character to join all of those together, and then we trim that to get rid of any extra new lines. And that's how this score string comes out. And that's it. That's basically the essence of it. We also have a dictionary, which I mentioned before. So these are all the Wordle allowed words. And we've imported those into the sheet, and we check against those to make sure our guesses are good. And if you do achieve victory, this cell here is actually going to notice that you do have victory and just build a string that says, oh yeah, Wordle, and then, whatever your score was out of 6, and then it'll start a new line and paste in that score string that we made on that guess 2 sheet. So there's a lot going on here, and this is just how I've chosen to done this. And you may have your own way of doing this, and I'd encourage you to take on this or a similar project, because Google Sheets is really, really cool, and in many ways is really just a programming language. So when we're talking about how can we do programming? Well, actually, the Google Sheet is a great way to just start programming and thinking about the relationships between data and different variables, and you can build stuff like this. You can build a game. You can build yourself a really fantastic financial calculator. I've built graphing calculators. I've built hundreds of different little mini tools, as well as some bigger form tools. And it's just a really fun and easy way to dip your toe into some programming. So I hope you found this interesting, or um, maybe not, but um, I would encourage you, regardless of how you feel about my breakdown, to try out your own editing. Thanks.